A research article published by Biomed Central revealed that migrant caregivers' ability to communicate assertively to their employers had improved their substandard working conditions. Welcome to Season 2 of Mom Let's Talk, brought to you by North York Community House, an organization that builds strong, resilient, and inclusive communities in Northwest Toronto. I'm Farhannah, your host. In this season, we'll be speaking with Maria, a registered nurse who began working as a live-in caregiver in 2017. Due to the sensitivity of our topic, the names of our interviewees have been changed. With the hope of providing a better future for herself, her sister, and her single mom, Maria left her job in Dubai as an assistant nurse to move to Canada. Let's continue to listen to Maria's story.
So when that time I finished the contract of my employer, so I find another employer which can give me 40 hours in a week because it's so hard to work like 3 jobs in a week. It's so hard to work like different setting, different house, different people that you will interact. It's easy to interact people. It's easy to yung magiging adjustment mo. Kaso nga lang, yung weather din dito, yun din yung challenge dito kasi malamig, mahirap mag-travel, malayo yung part-time mo, malayo yung bahay ng employer mo. So by that time when I finished my contract, so I said, I cannot, I don't want to renew anymore. So I find another job which is that specific part-time also. They said they want to hire me. So thanks God also that I have like 40 hours in a week. And I always put in my mind, those challenges is only like a tryout. That sooner or later, all the struggles will have an end. So lahat ng pagod, pawis, puyat, hirap, at the end of it, then magiging successful ka pa rin. At saka, yung pamilya mo, aangat din siya kagaya ng mangyayari sa iyo. So, my advice for all who wants to come here as a caregiver, so all the struggle, you have always to be patient, know your goals, and it is really important to know your rights as an employee and to know the rights of employer also. And you have really to read your contract before you have to sign it, because every step there is important, so that in case of any problem, you can say there, I signed this one and it was already in my contract that I have to follow this, you have to follow that one. And if ever like there's any problem, then I think proper communication is the most important one to resolve all the problems. And dapat lang talaga magtiis, mag-open ka sa lahat ng bagay sa work, sa employer mo, para lang talaga maayos yung trabaho mo. Because it's so hard to work every day that you don't like your employer and your employer doesn't like you. So it's so hard. It will not be easy for the caregivers to do this, to do that. A lot of like miscommunication. So the thing is, they cannot finish the contract. So that's more complicated.
Thank you for sharing your story with us, Maria. And joining us again is Ella Tan, the Employment and Family Support Worker for Filipino women at North York Community House. Hi, Ella. It's nice to have you back.
Hi, Farhannah, and thanks for having me.
So on the previous episode, we learned that Maria struggled to adjust with working with her first employer in Canada. We also talked about how Maria felt like she was being monitored by her employer, even the food she ate. To me, these seem to be the type of issues that caregivers need to discuss with their employers. However, as you mentioned in our previous episode, the dependent nature of the live-in caregivers and employers' relationship can prevent caregivers to be open with their employers.
Yes, that's very true, Farhannah. Filipino caregivers are very much dependent with their employers in terms of their financial stability, housing, and their relationship, that they don't want to they don't want to take risk of having conflict with their employers because of that reason. And I think this has something to do with our history of oppression in the Philippines. That's why, some Filipinos are not very vocal or prefer to be non-confrontational. Since the time of Spanish colonization, there have been some serious consequences if you're too assertive. You don't talk back to people in power, right? So it is considered as an act of defiance and could be dangerous. You could be publicly shamed, or you can be physically threatened. And this has became a part of our culture and seeped into our relationship, family relationship, teacher-student relationship, employee-employers relationship. So it's really hard for many Filipinos to question those in power or, being assertive. In a way, if you want to express your opinion about things, you kind of make sure that there's no consequences in terms of your job and your employment, because as we all know, caregivers their life is very much dependent on their financial stability. They need to send money back home. And in addition, in Filipino culture, we pay high regard to obedience, right? So particularly in parent-child relationship, which then affects our personality even when we become adults. We tend to suppress our feelings, make tiis, than say what we really think. So, and then we tend to get angry and aggressive in another context, which those who don't have power over us. So we could become resentful that our opinions and feelings are not validated. Kaya, minsan nahuhulog parati sa chismis, right? So this really shows up in the employer-caregiver relationship. And the threat to a caregiver's livelihood is real, so we need to be very careful about this. In Canada, knowing that we have rights as an employees, we need to educate ourselves on our rights, learn to communicate with these employers, and ensure that we have the right documentation and get social and legal support when we need it. So, for example, if an employer fires you without cause, there can be serious consequence for the employer, right? So, most cases of unfair labor practices for caregivers are hidden within the four walls of the employer's home. Community organizations like ours that work with caregivers need to advocate for them and other workers who are facing this kind of challenges.
Thanks for sharing that piece of history with us, Ella. That is so true and so needed. And Maria talks about how her employer started trusting her when she became more vocal about her challenges. How can kababayan caregivers do that effectively in such a way that their employers wouldn't perceive it as being confrontational or be seen as mareklamo or reclamador?
Thank you for that question, Farhannah. So we have to understand that this is a professional relationship, right? And in a live-in caregiver setting, the boundaries can be blurred since you are living and working with your employer 24/7. And still, boundaries are very important. Some of the things that you can do is, first, read and understand your contract. This way, when you speak to your employer regarding your number of hours and your scope of work, it is always supported by a contract that you and your employer have agreed upon. A lot of caregivers are, they just sign a contract without really reading it and fully understanding what's written on their contract, right? So I think it's really important that you know how many hours you work in a week. That's an example of, understanding your contract. And if you work more than 40 hours as stipulated in your contract, you need to make sure that you speak to your employer and that, inform them that it's not written on my contract. How do we go about it? So that's part of their negotiation, right? So is she going to get paid, or would she agree on the additional request that she would work on a weekend, right? So those are the things that we need to be mindful about in terms of understanding our contract. Set up a meeting with your employer to discuss your work on an ongoing basis. What's going well and what needs addressing. So ask for time to check in and try and develop a relationship that is more professional.
Taking the initiative to start conversations with employers can be challenging for some caregivers. Before setting up a meeting, do you have any suggestions on how to prepare for it?
It's really important to prepare yourself when setting up a meeting with your employer. Here are some tips to make sure that you are prepared. Number one, I think I mentioned this earlier, but I'm going to mention this now. Number one, list down all your possible questions to your employer. So have a separate sheet of paper and make sure that you have all those questions in mind. You have read your contract very well, and if you have some concern within the details of your contract, then write it down and put it on a separate sheet of paper and make sure, you don't forget anything. And also when expressing your concern, you have to be very specific. Like for example, if you are requested to work after working hours, like you're supposed to start 6 a.m. and ends up 5 p.m., and then your employer would request you to work beyond 6 a.m. because she has to go somewhere, do the errands, or going to a party, then you have to specify this concern to your employers if you are not being paid on the extra hours that you stayed in their home. Or even if you're a live-in caregiver, you're inside the home, but your contract says you only have to work within the specific time frame, you have to mention that to your employer. Number 3, when negotiating with certain issues, decide what you want and what you're going to accept. This is something that we need to practice as well because it's a skill. It's a negotiation skill that we need to practice. Think about how far you're willing to compromise. So sometimes because we feel like, we don't want to risk this relationship with our employer. And sometimes even if we already have scheduled a meetup with our friend on a weekend or a family member, so because your employer requested it, then you don't say something about it. You need to make sure that it's clear for you and for your employers. You have to say that you have to be very specific that you're already making plans for the weekend. And also, if you chose to work, address or ask questions about how are you being compensated on that extra work that you will put up for the weekend. Also, if you feel uncomfortable about your situation and feel like you're being taken advantage of, always remember to document everything that is asked of you in a journal or possible email to yourself or to a friend. The reason why I'm saying this, it's because sometimes employers can be very, they don't have boundaries because they feel like it's their house. You can just go into your room and, look on your passport and private things. So if you can't trust or you don't have privacy in your employer's home, then send it to your email so that you will have your own copy that's not, that's confidential. And there's also some tips on how you're able to do the proper documentation, right? Number 1, make an entry on your journal and make sure to write down time and date. In the event that you will be seeking legal assistance, these are the information that they're going to ask from you. The time and date, and describe the incident, what happened, right? How it happened. What are the actions taken, what you said to your employer, and how they respond to you. So those are the important things. And some of the basic questions that legal or paralegal worker will be asking from you if in the event that you chose to seek legal assistance regarding your employment situation. I would also recommend meeting with a settlement worker or a lawyer or social worker to learn about how to approach your situation and what your options are. So, because a lot of caregivers, because they're inside the house and they have limited resources, like they don't have access to networks, so they don't know about this, that there's a settlement worker or there's a social worker that can help them about their situation. So this is something that we want to make sure that everyone who listened to this podcast would have the information that they can go to their nearest community center, or maybe call 311 if they can't go outside their employer's house. Call 311. That's the City of Toronto number, and they will provide you all the resources that you need in terms of paralegal or accessing settlement workers. Then also ask to speak to your employer and set up a meeting. Again, so this is what we called earlier, check in with your employers, right? Give enough time and set up the meeting in advance at a time you think they will be in a better position to discuss or have a conversation with you. Also make notes of the meeting. So you have to work out what to say and make notes at your meeting so you have documentation. So I think this is very important so that the employer would realize that you're serious about your concern. And it's important to have the right documentation and a support system in place so we can have the confidence and tools to communicate effectively and work towards our goals. So what are these support systems? It could be your family member. It could be your friends, like a caregiver group. Settlement worker is your support system. Social worker, legal or paralegal services. So those are your support system. And make sure that in the event that you decide to take legal actions on your situation, then you have all those resources. You have the numbers that you can call immediately when you need them.
Thank you so much for sharing these great tips, Ella. I'm sure caregivers will find these practical and useful. I think it's also important to remind listeners that Niche is one of those organizations that they can reach to, and specifically for live-in caregivers, that you're available in case they need any support. Again, thank you so much, Ella. This has been a very helpful conversation, not only for caregivers, but also for those of us who might be facing challenges with our work. For live-in caregivers who might need support, how can they contact you?
They can reach me through my email, etan@nych.ca, or they can give me a call at 416-636-2600, extension 4228.
Great. And special thanks to Maria for sharing your story with us. Next on Mom Let's Talk, we'll discuss how precarious working conditions and immigration status have affected Maria's mental health. Thank you for listening. Hanggang sa susunod. This podcast is brought to you by North York Community House. North York Community House builds strong, resilient, and inclusive communities in Northwest Toronto. We help children, youth, parents, and seniors become active, engaged citizens who lead positive change in their neighborhoods. Find us at nych.ca.